up some of the content creators of Beast Wars, ladies and gentlemen, who've worked on the brand for the last 20 years. And hopefully they'll be able to share some very interesting stories for you, and hopefully you'll learn something. So, first of all, ladies and gentlemen, he was one of the major forces in the fandom during the time of Beast Wars, and was very instrumental in getting an awful lot of really geeky stuff out of each episode. Please welcome Mr. Jim Sorensen.
You're all getting sick of me by now.
In addition to writing the IDW Beast Wars comics, he also co-wrote one of the two-part episodes for the Beast Wars finale. Ladies and gentlemen, it is Mr. Simon Furman. And finally, he has just completed the BotCon 2016 comic book revolving all around the Beast Wars. Ladies and gentlemen, author of Dawn of the Predacons, it is Mr. John Paul Beauvais.
That's the Dawn. That's Dawn of the Predacus, not Dawn of the Predacons. Dawn of the Predacus.
It's Sunday morning, and I'm sorry, Jake.
I don't know, it does work. I'm sorry too.
But what is it? For not what has happened, but what is about to?
What is about to unfold.
Yeah. Okay, ladies and gentlemen. So, Jim, I guess while I'm struggling with feedback, is it better if I stand up? Wonderful. This is going to look really old, but no.
I've always been really bad with feedback.
Yeah. Jim, why don't you start then giving people who... Is anybody not familiar with Beast Wars? One or two. Right, okay. Jim, do you want to give us a quick synopsis of the brand and where it started?
Okay, well, Transformers in the United States debuted in 1984, ran through 1990. At the tail end of the line, they were looking for ideas that would make it continue to resonate. They tried Micromasters, Pretenders, didn't work. The brand went on hiatus. It came back a couple years later as Generation 2. They had some great toys. They had some fantastic comics. I mean, really, really kick-ass comics. I can't talk enough about how good. I forget who wrote them, but they were really good comics. But then sadly, even that didn't, I think more on the strength of the toy line, didn't really find a home in the hearts and minds of the kids of the day. So Hasbro had recently acquired a company called Kenner, another toy company, and they said, you know what, we're not having much luck finding a way to make Transformers relevant. So they shipped it off to this new company they had acquired, a new set of creators, and they came up with a sort of brand new idea called the Beast Wars. This idea of transforming, and there have been animals in Transformers since 1984. You had Ravage and Laserbeak, and then the Dinobots and the Insecticons and so on and so forth. But they said, well, let's make the whole line beasts. We'll have a new set of bad guys, the Predacons, a new set of good guys, the Maximals. They'll all turn into organic-looking animals. It won't be sort of these robotic dinosaurs, the sort of Zord kind of guys. They'll look like actual animals. The mammals will have fur. The insects will be chitinous. And they made this really neat toy line, and it caught on. And to promote it for the first time in the United States and in Europe since 1987, they came out with a new cartoon to promote it, and the Beast Wars were born. And they brought in a couple of guys. Obviously, it's a huge team, lots of people involved. But the story editors, Larry DiTilio and Bob Forward, came up with the mythology that would be Beast Wars, and they accidentally they sort of reinvented the origin from the Transformers More Than Meets the Eye pilot, which kicked off the television show in America and in Europe, and that Marvel had come up with, that got ported over to the comics, that was used in the TV show, of two ships having a battle, crashing on Earth. Actually, crashing on prehistoric Earth, as it turns out, which would eventually become a fairly important plot point in the Beast Wars. And but they did that completely accidentally. They hadn't realized that was the war. And the Maximals and Predacons adopted beast modes to battle on Earth. Then the conceit was that there was so much raw energon, and they played coy with it. They didn't tell you it was Earth. There was a weird alien planet with 2 moons and with energon crystals everywhere, and with strange alien artifacts like, you know, standing stones and things that had some resonance to, you know, little hints that it might be Earth. But the conceit was that there was so much energon on Earth that they couldn't safely exist in their robot modes for very long, so they would turn into the local native creatures, and they battled it out. And they got tied into, for the first time in Transformers history, the creative team really started getting tied into the online fandom. You know, that wasn't a thing that had happened certainly with the original Transformers cartoon. Simon, I don't think that happened even with the P2 comics.
No, it was all pre-internet. You know, I suppose the internet was only in its youth at the Beast Wars time, but there was enough that, yes, they started to get feedback from fans who were just saying, but what about this? You know, how is this related to Generation 1? And neither Bob nor Larry had really meant to link it to anything. So they were thrown by this. They were thrown by the fact that there was a fan base. They had no clue really that there was a built-in audience who had been watching this, expecting almost the nods and winks to Generation 1 that weren't there.
But they quickly started bringing them in. They brought Starscream in as a cameo, and then eventually as a character. And that was actually another coincidence. They brought Starscream in just as a disembodied spark, thinking, okay, well, he's a cool character, we can bring him in, not really being aware at all that there's this whole history of Starscream being a ghost that really could go and possess creatures. So again, quite a lot of serendipity. And then they brought...
I was going to say, yeah, that was when during all this sort of internet thing, you know, one of the vocal voices out there was a guy called Ben Yee. And, you know, Ben is a lovely guy. He runs, is it Beast Wars
BWTF.com.
Brilliant site. And, you know, and Ben's a lovely guy. And very quickly, I'm probably taking your story here, but very quickly Bob and Larry just got on with Ben, and Ben started to supply them with the background information they didn't have on what people expected or were maybe expecting to see in this series, and they weren't getting. So, you know, finally they had a kind of... They brought him on as a sort of semi-official consultant.
I think he was an official. I think he was credited in the comics, in the show, as a story consultant.
He was.
Yeah, for sure. And he helped them bring these elements in, and that culminated, I think, in the season 2 finale, the agenda, where it's revealed that all along, of course it wasn't, but in the story, all along Megatron's plan had been to go to the Ark, where the slumbering Autobots and Decepticons lay, and would one day in 1984 awaken and restart the Great War. And because they had access to the ship, they could rewrite history. And that was the big season 2 finale.
And, you know, Bob and Larry, who I got to know very well, were great storytellers, and so, you know, they were very receptive to all this, and they were very good at taking what they'd thrown in there, you know, just sort of, not a random, but things that they didn't know were going to pay off in this way, and readapting their storyline. You know, I think it's the Golden Disc, isn't it?
Yeah, the Golden Disc. Megatron had a Golden Disc that was quite important, and they eventually revealed it was the Golden Disc from the Voyager space probe.
So, you know, they just had this, and they were great in a way to work for, because, you know, they just had this sort of, you know, that we kind of took on board later with IDW and the feedback we were getting. They weren't going to dismiss it, they were going to sort of embrace it and work with it. And they, you know, and it turned Beast Wars into what it was really.
And Beast Wars is always a terrific series. They had great characters, they had wonderful humor, they had great action, and much of it was the serendipity. I've used that word before, but it's when they would discover that something wasn't working and they tweak it into a way that worked wonderfully. And I think the best example of that is probably Waspinator. I mean, JP, you know that story, yeah? No? Okay, sorry. About why he got killed all the time? Oh, okay. You'll get looped into the conversation at some point. So what had happened was it was a CG cartoon, and they were writing it like it was traditional cell-based cartoons because they were so new and they weren't used to it. And so they wrote this character who had an Waspinator, and he had a very slow. It took him a long time to get his lines out based on the way they had asked Scott to do the character. And in a regular cartoon, that would pace just fine. But in CG, as it turned out, you had to pace it more like live action. And someone who was very slow in the way he spoke slowed down the action considerably and was causing them pacing problems. So they started blowing him up a lot. And that's why. And they would have scripts where it says, okay, Waspinator gets shot. But then the animators started picking up on the fact that, oh, this guy's getting shot a whole lot. And a script that says Rhinox shoots Waspinator turns into Rhinox pulling out a chain gun and going and it turns into a whole bit where that wasn't in the script at all. They just got the animation back and they said, oh yeah, we can run with it, and then it becomes a feedback loop where then they start writing in Waspinator getting killed in more and more interesting ways. But it's all because they'd written a character that would have been fine in traditional animation, but didn't quite work in CG, and that was their workaround, to just keep writing them out of each episode.
I didn't know that.
Really? And then they get to the end of season 3, and at that point they've been so involved in the fan community, and I think there've been a lot of voices saying, we'd really like to see some of the G1 writers came back, which of course culminated in.
Yeah, I mean, actually, my involvement with Beast Wars started before that episode. I was invited out to BotCon in 1997, and at the time I didn't know there was a thing called BotCon for a start. I didn't know that there were Transformers fans actually. To me, the comic had finished twice, and Transformers had definitely finished this time. I had no idea Beast Wars had started and was starting to, be a proper Transformers series. So when I went to BotCon 97, myself and Andrew Wildman were asked by the organisers to do a Beast Wars comic. And we were just like, we don't know what this is. And they sent us some probably VHS episodes at the time, and we did pretty much a crash course on Beast Wars. And we had to sort of put the toy exclusives from that year's BotCon into the story. I think they were Pack-Rat and Fractal. So very, very quickly we had to do a crash course. Oh my god, there's this thing called Beast Wars. How do we tell a story? How do we put these characters who are actually repaints of other characters into the story? So anyway, it got done. We went out to the convention. The story was called Ground Zero, I think. Soundtrack guy. Yeah, Vince did the music. He did an actual musical thing called Ground Zero, which was the theme for it. And we got to meet the cast of Beast Wars and Bob Ford and Larry DiTilio. So, it was great. And, I had no agenda whatsoever with this. It was just that I got talking to Bob and Larry, and it turns out that they'd become big fans of my Generation 2 work, and they'd started to feed ideas from Generation 2 into Beast Wars. And and they would hold their hands up and say, we just really wanted to do this. And I can't remember what element it was. Maybe it was
I think the Swarm was something that they considered as a possible origin for the Vought, which were the aliens that had seeded the planet with Energon and built all those strange artifacts.
Yeah. So we had a really good BotCon. I think it was Scott McNeil, Venus Terzo, and David Kay. And utterly brilliant. Yeah. And I think Andrew and I went around the whole convention. Yes. But I mean, they were fabulous guys. And Bob and Larry and I just really hit it off. And to this day I'm still in touch with Bob. And and he was just such a lovely guy. He talked and we talked. And then I went away and thought no more of Beast Wars. And as it ticked towards 1998's BotCon, Bob Forward contacted me and said, look, we've got an idea to bring you on board as a writer on this. And I was like, brilliant, never written TV animation before, but I'll give it a shot. And Bob was very considerate with me, considering I hadn't done this and it was probably full of problems and I wasn't working in a screenwriting program or anything. Anyway, and he brought me on board, and and I think that came from that fan thing you were talking about, that they wanted some kind of resonance, and now we have the Ark in it, and we brought in the idea of the Nemesis spacecraft and called the two-parter Nemesis, and
do you remember how the name came about for the ship Nemesis?
I think I actually can't remember whether. Did we ever name it in the past?
No.
No. Then we must have just named it for that, and I don't know whether it was me or Larry and Bob or whoever, but that we decided to give it a name anyway. It just
I love the name. I love the name Nemesis. It's a really good. It really fits the.
I was pretty sure their intention was that the G1 ship was called the USS Kittens, which you've undermined, but that's okay.
But yeah, I think we just figured that the Ark had a name, the Decepticon ship could have a name, otherwise it's just, all the time they're going to refer to it as the Decepticon ship.
The ship?
Yeah.
Which one? Like the Decepticon? Oh.
So yeah, so that was the beginning of my proper involvement with Beast Wars. And unfortunately it was meant to be a slightly more ongoing gig than it turned out to be. It was never meant to be the finale, the episode. We floated several ideas around, one of which was the Ghost Starscream possessing the body of G1 Megatron, so he was going to be in it at one point. One of the ideas was to bring some of the Seeker jets who had never been in the animated show, Dirge or...
Yeah, well, I think it was to have the Thrust, Dirge and Ramjet show up in the Nemesis, in that episode, to explain sort of why they're not in the first 20 or so episodes of the original G1 cartoon, and then they randomly show up out of nowhere. And it's not long after an episode where they dig up the Decepticon ship, so it would sort of explain that.
But with schedules and the sort of finally that it was going to be the end, unfortunately my episode ended up being, Bob and I spoke about the fact that it was going to be a two-parter, and did I want to do the first or the last part of it? And I just said, I might as well do the last part and round it off. So we split the story between us. Bob wrote part one and I wrote part two, but with oversight throughout. Really Bob is the co-creator of that whole sort of finale, and Larry of course as well. So I was very happy again for the work. It was a door opener for me, because after Beast Wars, Bob Forward took me on to various other series. He was script editor on. I worked with him on, I think, called Roswell Conspiracies, Dan Dare. We moved on to, we bounced onto a few shows after that. So yeah, it was great, but it was sadly the end, and so it was like, oh brilliant, I'm writing Beast Wars. No, I'm not.
And JB, how did you come to, what does Beast Wars mean to you?
I grew up with G1. I apologise for those of you who were around last night will know why my voice might be husky today. And it's not booze induced, it's Grimlock shouting induced. I very much love G1. I think I've said this before, the days before the internet, when everybody I was at school with decided that Transformers was last year and now it's all about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and something else, and we don't play with Transformers anymore. I was very much the kid that went, no, I'm sticking with this, I'm just going to keep going even if I'm the only person playing with this. And so G1 was very, very personal, very, very special to me. And of course, I didn't have anyone to talk to about it. I didn't know other people. Literally, the fact that this exists is the most amazing thing in the world to me. And I might have heard maybe about Beast Wars, or I might have seen an animal on a shelf. I thought, oh, I don't really know what this is. I don't quite understand what it is. And I lived in quite a small town. There weren't big toy shops. There wasn't anybody else that had a Transformers interest, so I had very little access to information. And then I happened to be at a friend's house, 5 o'clock in the morning. It was on TV, and it was the last episode of season 2. It was my first episode. And I was sat there, and pretty much my reaction was this. I've never had my tiny mind blown into pieces quite as much as I did watching that episode. And the thing that mattered so much to me was, as someone who loved G1, to have something go, do you know what, we love G1 too. We're not disrespecting it, we're embracing it, we're loving it. And oh my goodness, how much more important is this story in terms of the grand scheme of things. And of course, it being the UK, they thought, well, now we've shown the last episode of season 2, we'll never show another episode ever again. So I did what any sensible person would do, or a sensible, they decided to release season 3 on VHS tape. So I watched the last season first, with the first episode missing, unless you went to Toys R Us. And then season 2, and then season 1. So for me, it seemed like it would all be pre-planned. I couldn't believe it was. But Beast Wars by far became the sort of my absolute favourite cartoon, just in terms of it was written intelligently. It was science fiction. They had a plan, or they were very clever at stringing it into a plan. The characters were incredible, the stories were amazing, it had heart, it had stakes. You know, it's just, for me, it's just timelessly brilliant. So, and once that door opened, it completely just, so I then rushed out and bought every toy in the entire universe ever. And about 2 years after that, I had access to the internet and realised I could find out all this stuff.
What was your first Beast Wars toy? If you remember.
I think it might have been. I think it was Rat Trap, season 2 Rat Trap. I think I bought all of the season 2, the Transmetal ones. Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing about Beast Wars. When they sent us those VHS tapes to sort of catch up with, for the first time, I was watching it like this is just great TV, and you know, and I'd never had that relationship with the G1 cartoon. I'd always been slightly too old for it, so it seemed a little bit sort of, you hate me for saying it's a little bit kiddie, but somehow Beast Wars had you could see it had an adult brain behind it, and it was just good storytelling, and that was all I'd ever really wanted from a Transformers show.
And Simon, you were brought back into Beast Wars on the comic book side.
Yeah, you know, it did never end again, and you know, I mean, I really thought that would be the end of it, because, you know, I mean, Bob, you know, obviously it became Beast Machines, it got a new set of script editors, and they had their own writers, and so, you know, I was happy to go my merry little way with it, and yeah, you know, but I kind of had this, I just developed this fondness for it. You know, by this point I knew Benny E very well, and I knew his passion for it, and his depth of knowledge of it, and I kind of, you know, I had this definite itch to do more Beast Wars, and so again, when we started the IDW verse, you know, the first thing I suggested after Infiltration and you know, the core G1 was that we do Beast Wars comics. And you know, good old IDW, they were just receptive to the idea. They said, well, absolutely, but how do we do this? Beast Wars finished. You know, it became Beast Machines. It's going to be difficult to do this. And we had started a Beast Wars series for Dreamwave. Before Dreamwave went under, we'd begun a continuation. We dragged them back from the conclusion. We'd stretched the moment between Beast Wars and Beast Machines, and drag them back in their ship as they leave at the end of season 3, and they get sort of propelled back to Earth, and you know, we kind of kicked it off again. And how we were going to link it up at the end, I don't know. But you know, we had this plan, and it started to involve some of the toys that never made it into the show originally.
You did a whole lot with Razor this time.
Yeah. And and again, Ben had introduced me to all the other toys I didn't really know about, and the characters, and he had a great, he was my co-writer on it in many ways, because I could go to him and say, what characters can I use? Who's a big bad I can use? And so we got Magmatron out of that, and it was a shame because it was going to be a direct continuation, but when we got to the IDW series, we obviously didn't want to do what we were going to do for the Dreamwave series. It might have got mired in issues with the bankruptcy and could we do that story? So I extracted elements from that story, the Magmatron angle on it, and that really became the IDW Beast Wars series. But we decided not to do it as a continuation, but rather a kind of it's happening sort of slightly out of sync with the other events of Beast Wars. So, we explained that's why you didn't know about all this happening. There's a time sync issue, so they're literally wandering through the same space, but they're out of time with the core Beast Wars series. So, talk about dodging around it a bit, but there you go. And and we got 2 series out of it, great fun. I would have definitely done a third. So.
And a profile book too.
And a profile book, which is largely Ben's work. I did a few of the profiles, I did a share of them, but largely that massive book of Beast Wars profiles is the work of Ben Yee, who did all the legwork on that and certainly compiled all the sort of detailed background and appendices and whatever else. So, that book is very much Ben Yee's book that I just did a bit towards.
And then several years later, the IDW continuity, Beast Wars continuity, got picked up again by JP.
Yes.
Is that, or am I misrepresenting that?
Sorry. The most interesting thing I find in terms of defining what Beast Wars is what continuity is Beast Wars, because it has aspects of G1, it has aspects of Generation 2, obviously IDW has had aspects of it, and BotCon has developed that over the years as well. The mission statement, or in terms of the book that I wrote, the idea was that it should fit into continuity with the show and what IDW had done.
And just to clarify, we're talking specifically about Simon Kerman's IDW Beast Wars cartoon.
Yeah,
and the only reason I mention that is because in the mainline IDW continuity, Beast Wars characters are starting to show up not as having a Beast Wars, but as having their own colony, or with Tarantula. I don't want to give things away, but there's going to be a Sins of the Record panel that uses some elements of this as well.
I'm not sure it's out yet, but recently someone has drawn out the Beast Wars timeline.
Yes, it's out.
It is out.
It's in the Transformers
it is out.
magazine.
Okay.
I don't think it's hit the UK yet, but it's starting to hit the States.
It is the most excitingly crazy spider diagram you'll ever see in terms of trying to knit, exactly what fits where together. Now, one of the things which I invented, which is the story that I told was a one-shot that takes place at the very tail end of the Great War finishing. It was originally, when it was pitched to IDW before BotCon, it was actually the end, it was a 4-issue thing about the end of the Great War, which would be peppered with Beast Wars, that was kind of coming largely at the end. And the story that I ended up telling was taking the bits that would have been peppered throughout a mini-series and the very conclusion and have that as a standalone issue. One of the things that I had to invent, the thing about Beast Wars, as someone who adores it, is that when you go online, it being one of the first online kind of continuity, people talk about this, is everybody knows what Larry thought certain things meant and what Bob meant, but they're not the same thing.
No, they're really not.
Some people know exactly what the BotCon tech specs say and what the profile book says, but it's not, again, necessarily the same thing. So it's a hard thing because you think to yourself, I really want to make sure that everybody who comes from a certain point of view of how these things work can be satisfied with what the answer is, which is a route that leads to madness. But and so one of the things I invented, which had it been a 4 issue would have made more sense, was transmatter. So it's mentioned in the story that there's a material which, if you harness it properly, is permanently in transition, and it can be anything. So it's neither future nor past. It's neither technological nor organic, and it's kind of almost the precursor to the technology that makes transwarp possible. So that's why they can go back in time, whether that was intended or unintentional. That's how it happens, and it enables some of the Beast Wars technologies to happen. And my notion was, although there wasn't room for this in one issue, was that when you tamper with it, once you try and harness it and turn something that doesn't want to become any one thing into one thing, is you open the door just a crack to other realities. So it's not a multiverse, but suddenly people might start talking about Primus, even though they might have been made by the Quintessons, or they might mention, so it just meant that discontinuity becomes continuity without having to do an Elseworlds 48 maxi issue. Now there's 100 different Optimus Primals fighting in a mega world. So, because Beast Wars is complicated, and if you love it, you really want to acknowledge
one of the brilliant things that Bob and Larry did in creating the original The Beast Wars cartoon, which really, unlike most other Transformers franchises, there's a few other ones, but unlike most other Transformers franchises, Beast Wars so much is about that one cartoon. There aren't really multiple conflicting, there's lots of G1 continuities. It might be the Marvel stories that Simon and Bob Budiansky told, or it might be the Sumbo stories that you watch, or it might be IDW, or maybe it's for you it's Dreamwave, or even just the text battles. Sorry,
Kiss Players.
Conceivably, it's possibly. That actually explains a lot. Now that you say that, but no, it's what's great about it is with Beast Wars, it's just the one. So when you think Beast Wars, it might be what Bob and Larry did plus the IDW Beast Wars comics, or it might be what Bob and Larry did plus the BotCon comics that they did. But it's always that. It might be, there's that one central element, and that one central element drew from most of what existed in Transformers lore at the time. They drew from the comics. They used those concepts, but they also drew from the cartoon. They were indiscriminate, and you could, if you were a diehard cartoon person, you could easily imagine Beast Wars as the future of that universe. But it was just as valid to imagine Beast Wars as the future of what happened in the Generation 1 and Generation 2 comics, and it's really quite clever. So I think that's kind of what you're saying with the transmitter. It reminds me of this sort of the Schrodinger's cat paradox, the idea that in quantum mechanics at a very small level, until something's observed, it can be more than one thing. And the very act of observing something collapses the wave function, makes the electron assume a specific state, and if the cat's fate is tied to that state, it makes the cat alive or dead. The cat is simultaneously alive and dead until observed. And I kind of think Beast Wars it has all these different potential origins until you observe it, and then it collapses down to one. And the transmitter facilitates that.
Yeah,
Science.
That's the first time I've ever talked about quantum mechanics to applause. I'll say that. Or laughter. So.
Now do it again twice the speed.
I'm not John Machida.
Yeah, so absolutely, because like you say, you can't. Beast Wars, the cartoon is golden. You can't, it is precious, and like I say, everything else builds around that. But it pulled in so many influences, and on a day-to-day on the show, a show that's moving, you can sort of be flexible with continuity, and there were contradictions in the show, which
any collaborative work and most non-collaborative works that are long enough, they're going to be those hiccups. That's the nature of the beast.
but they're all explainable. It's all from a place of love and, you know.
I gotta tell you, it's an industry, comics, television, people get into it because they have passion for it. And, you know, nobody's phoning it in. Everybody's telling the best stories they can in the best way that they can. But, you know, there will be mistakes, there'll be hiccups, there'll be some bit of continuity that I might not know, that I might contradict, and I can probably explain it away and hand wave it, but, you know, the truth is, things happen. That's life.
I've certainly said in other fandoms more than once, that's not how warp drive works. You can't beam through shields. Like, we all have those things, and you can make explanations for them.
Since we've talked about the Beast Wars that you guys have worked on, for the Transformers Fan Club, I've been working on a series called Beast Wars Uprising. I've mostly been telling it in the form of prose stories, but it's about an alternate Beast Wars timeline where they never came to Earth, and the Great War sort of, instead of ending in this Autobot victory, ended in this weird stalemate where everybody sort of ran out of Energon, and the Autobots and Decepticons, who sort of become this unified, if somewhat contentious with each other, faction called the Builders, are this decrepit race of ancient mechs that don't have much mobility but have a whole lot of economic and social power. They own most of the capital on Cybertron, and the Maxims and Predacons are these two young races that are sort of artificially really put at loggerheads with each other, so that they're too busy sort of fighting each other and having rivalries with each other to sort of question why there's this race of you know, ancient, sort of pathetic beings, the second and third string Autobots and Decepticons telling them what to do. It's called the Beast Wars Uprising. We've done 4 stories to date, and we've got a few more in the pipeline, hopefully, that we'll see before the fan club loses its license at the end of the year. And they were originally going to be toys for this, and I don't think, only a few of them came out, but we had some of the toys that were supposed to come out, you know, eventually down the line. This is one of our main characters was Black Arachnia, and they haven't gone to Earth yet, so they don't have beast modes yet. So this is our digibash of what the Black Arachnia toy was going to look like. It was out of the Generations Promia, so we were going to reinterpret her as a motorcycle. And we've got Dinobot from the Springer mode. So actually, I think in the story he was called Dinobot with a Y, D-Y-N-O-Bot, because he's not a dinosaur yet. But, and here we've got Rat Trap. A lot of Beast Machines influences there. And, this is just a lithograph we did of sort of all of a lot of the characters from the main stories. Leo Convoy was one of our main characters. His toy actually did come out. Most of the rest of them did not. Eject's toy came out too. And Galvatron too, the Beast Wars second Galvatron. In Japan there was a show called Beast Wars Second, and Galvatron was the main villain. And this was built out of the Optimus Prime toy. So here are some of the toys that might have been. So you're not getting any of these, but they were all under consideration from Fun Publication. If they had the license another 2 or 3 years, we might have seen more of those.
I've got one more little sort of Beast Wars thought that's occurred to me. Spotlight Shockwave is effectively my love letter to Beast Wars, because it features the Energon overload field on prehistoric Earth that necessitates the Dinobots having to take on organic covering in order to function on there, and it's completely Beast Wars, you know. I mean, and the fact that they shout beast modes when they transform, you know, the whole thing was designed as my little love letter to Beast Wars.
We only have about 5 minutes left. Are there any questions to the... Okay.
I'm running. I'll take that as a yes.
Sorry, we're long-winded, especially me.
Actually, okay, I've watched Beast Wars about 3 times, and I've read the comics, but there's one thing I never quite understood, and I was hoping you guys could give me the answer. You spoke about the votes. And I remember that in the show, there was something about Tarantulas hating the Vogues, and Tarantulas was like the Unicronian. That's something I never quite understood, and I can't find information anywhere, so I was hoping you could explain to me what was going on there, please.
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, I think what you saw was as much as Bob and Larry put on the screen. They had some theories that they didn't get to elaborate on. One of them was that the Bach were the swarm. I think there were some other theories, weren't there?
Yeah, I mean, the main idea, yeah, so again, this played into the book that I wrote, was that the notion of I wouldn't expect anything less from unicorn spawn was the line that was said about tarantulas. Now, I can't remember if it was Larry or Bob, but Larry or Bob was like, yes, I literally meant that. And the other one was, no, that wasn't literally what was meant. It was just a slur. Now what you then have is a fandom with two ideas of what that sentence means, which I attempted to bridge to some extent. Obviously the bot didn't want time tampered with. Very much everything that Tarantulas' plan ultimately was to sort of wipe the main Autobot Decepticon kind of dominance off the map. So I think I always took it as the Predacons are sort of trying to undo or mess about with time. And I always felt like the bots were trying to ensure the time stream was preserved. So it was never completely explained, but I always took it as almost they were like temporal guardians, and Tarantulas in particular was quite happy to see it all burn because his lineage was separate. So Unicronian would have been a separate lineage, and Generation 2, them being first generation Cybertronians, would have also meant they predated Autobots and Decepticons. So whichever of those two strands, he still would have been safe. So he didn't care. He didn't care if Optimus Prime died or the time stream got wiped out, because him and the Triceratops Council would be fine. So yeah, some of that has to be extrapolated.
We've got one question over here.
One of my favourite parts of Beast Wars was the relationship between Silverboss and Black Arachnia, and I've watched every single series, and I've always wanted to find there aren't more relationships like that within series.
Yeah, I'd love to see more relationships as deep and well explored as those two.
I think Bob and Larry just wanted to create something that, spoke to people more than just your average Transformer series. So they wanted relatable things in there, and they wanted a relationship. And, it was a source of much humour, because, they're such sort of different and opposing characters. That, it gives you a sense of pathos about it, they just really wanted to tell stories that tugged heartstrings and things, and I think that's why they just said, well look, why can't we have a relationship? What's to say we can't? And they did.
I was going to say, even beyond that, there should be more shows like Beast Wars, written like Beast Wars, and with a cast and crew as amazing as Beast Wars. I'd like to see, Bob and Larry do something again, to be honest.
Oh, that'd be great, wouldn't it? Let's do one last question. Or maybe two, because we got two really enthusiastic people.
Well, if we're doing two, then I don't know.
Alright, are you going to make any more, animals for Beast Wars? Because, I was thinking maybe you make, more Dinobots. Like Dinobot, there was, there's a raptor, I think. You can maybe make more, maybe if you make Megatron into a Tyrannosaurus Rex, Dinobot into a Velociraptor, I don't know, just other dinosaurs, maybe more animals.
The trouble is we can't make those calls. Everything has to come from Hasbro first and foremost. So, nothing is impossible, because, there's always the chance there'll be more comics, one way or the other, for conventions, from IDW. And those things are always possible, but everything, especially with toys and new characters, all that stuff has to come from Hasbro.
Right, last question over here then. Aye.
Obviously you've got a very big love of Beast Wars, and this crept through into Regeneration 1 as well, because in the very last panel of the very last story you had Botanica pop through out of the pod at the very last minute.
The script says it's kind of like Botanica.
Yeah.
It was only meant to be an idea that something new is happening at the end. Whether it's Botanica or whatever, it was a little bit of a, not quite a Liege Maximo at the end of Generation 2, but it was just something thrown in there. This idea that everything is cyclical, and I thought, well, if there is an evolution, it's going to be Beast Wars or Beast Machines that is the next thing.
Well, I was going to say, my question was going to be actually, was that like your attempt to lead into a new Beast Wars series, or was that just like a standalone thing?
No, it wasn't. There was never meant to be a follow-on, or I had nothing specific in mind. It was just something. Some new life form is starting on Cybertron.
My interpretation that I took away from it was the idea that it never ends. That was the sort of the takeaway. I found that very hopeful. Like in a way that the Legion Maximo is sort of very ominous. It's almost the flip side to that coin, isn't it?
And it's not just random. It's built up to quite a long way, because the creatures from under Cybertron go into a cocoon state. And what you're seeing at the end is one of those hatching, those cocoons that have been sort of fermenting over the last 5 issues of Regeneration 1. One of those hatches at the end. So there's very much a sense of new life. Life persists, even after extinction. Life persists.
Thanks everybody very much. We had a lot of fun talking about Beast Wars. Hope you did too.
Ladies and gentlemen, Peter Forge going for Mr. Jim Sorensen, Simon Furman and John